Well now, bless your heart for sittin' a spell with mate Clara Rose Bennett, though most folks round Railton just say Rose. I'm 74 come October, and tonight a particular smell's driftin' in through my kitchen screen, warm peaches simmerin' slow, sweeter than Sunday kindness. That fragrance has gone and pried open a creaky door in my memory, and I can't settle till I speak it out loud. See, 2 fingers of daylight ago I unscrewed an old jelly jar and, mercy sakes, the scent clapped me right back to the summer of 1988, the very evening my world slipped off its hinges and tumbled down into the basement. Now, before I wander too far, Land o' Goshen, would you be a dear and tap that little thumbs up or jot a how do you do in the comments? It helps these tired bones keep tellin' stories, and I surely do read every note while my tea's steepin'. Thank you, sugar. Now where was I? Ah yes, the basement. Folks think a memory announces itself with thunder, but mine tiptoed in with the clink of a spoon against a mason jar. 1 minute I'm hummin' in the garden, same as I led the church choir back when the cornfields were green as heaven's own door, and the next my mind pulls me under those wooden beams, where damp earth pressed cold against my palms and the only window was the size of a postcard. I can still taste the dust, gritty like ground-up regrets, and hear the distant thunk of the grain elevator chains slappin' in the prairie wind. Back then Railton was a sleepy speck on the Nebraska map, 1 gas pump and a bait shop that sold licorice whips for a nickel. I'd been head librarian 26 proud years, quilt squares pinned up on the children's wall like bright little promises. But on a sticky July night in '88, my husband Frank, the same man who used to hoist me onto the county fair Ferris wheel, latched the cellar door behind me. For a spell of quiet, he said, till life straightened itself out. Darling, that spell stretched clear into the new millennium, and the walls down there heard more prayers, gasps, and cottonmouth lullabies than any preacher could bless. Why am I dredging it up now, so many moons later? Because that warm peach aroma carries with it the hush of secrets I kept folded like love letters under my tongue, and lately they've started flutterin', beggin' to be read. There's a photo, too, edges curled, smile frozen, and a rusty key that once burned a hole in my pocket even inside that pitch-dark tomb. These pieces won't stay still. They rattle like coins in a coffee can each time twilight settles over the corn. And after all these years I've learned a truth truer than gospel. A story left untold can sour faster than cream on a porch rail. So tonight I invite you to sit close, feel the porch boards groan beneath our rockers, and journey with me back to that July dusk when the air smelled of cut hay and distant lightning, and a single creak overhead changed the meter of my heartbeat. We'll wander through 10 recollections, some tender as a lullaby, some sharp enough to draw blood, until we reach the moment the sky split open and I crawled back into the light. If you stick with me, I promise a secret tucked beneath the very floor you're picturing, a secret that turned my husband into a stranger and a frightened librarian into a woman who could count the years by the drip of a leaky pipe. So pour yourself a cup, pull your shawl a little tighter, and lean in close, because what's rustlin' my piece tonight might just stir something restless in yours too. Well now, if you'll humor an old lady, let me shimmy the hands of the clock clear back to a summer morning in 1949, when the cornfields around Railton still smelled of dew and diesel, and the world, to my freckled eyes, was stitched together with pie crust edges and penny candy smiles. I was Clara Rose Bennett then, 9 years old, hair the color of wheat chaff, toes dusty from chasing garter snakes along the irrigation ditch, and I truly believed, with a certainty as bright as the clapboard church's steeple, that goodness planted itself in folks the way milkweed rides the wind and settles wherever it pleases. Daddy, A patient man who whistled blue skies while greasing the tractor kept his wristwatch clipped to his overall bib so he'd never lose track of time, yet Mama swore his heart beat by sunrise and songbirds instead. She was the town's unofficial memory keeper, pressing wildflowers between Bible pages and labeling them in looping cursive so future Bennetts might recall the scent of prairie verbena long after the blooms were gone. On Saturdays, we'd climb into the Rattletrap Ford and bump down Main Street, 3 blocks if you count the feed store, a parade of everyday wonders. Mrs. Ludlow stringing pennants over the bakery window, Old Man Cutter arguing grain prices out front of the cafe, teenagers squealing past on bicycles whose bells chimed like tiny church bells. Land o' Goshen, I can still taste those bakery crullers, thick with cinnamon, fried dark, wrapped warm in wax paper, and hear Mama remind me, Rose, kindness is like leaven, it only takes a touch to raise the whole loaf. By 12 I'd decided my future lay between book covers, not plowshares. I hoarded dog-eared Nancy Drews beneath my pillow and recited chapter titles like prayers, dreaming I'd one day shelve stories for every child bold enough to imagine further than the silo lights. High school glided by on the wings of sock hop records and hayride promises. That's where Frank Bennett first tipped his cap, grinning so wide I fancied the horizon tilted to stay in his light. He was 2 years older, already steering harvest trucks by dawn, pockets jingling with bottle caps he swore were Lucky Charms, and I, mercy sakes, thought the universe itself must have arranged that grin as proof the world returned sweetness to anyone patient enough to wait. We courted slow as sorghum, porch swings creaking time while the Milky Way stitched silver across the sky. On the night he placed Grandma Hattie's ring on my finger, the town band was rehearsing Sentimental Journey down at the Legion Hall, and I promised myself I'd build a life stitched from songs, peaches, and library cards. Marriage, in those early pages, read like a hymn. Sundays we sang in the choir, he low and steady, me weaving alto ribbons through the rafters, then lingered over pot roast suppers where the gravy clung to biscuits just right. Even the sting of his layoffs or the squeal of rusty hinges in our starter home couldn't shake my faith that trouble was temporary and love, like quilts and scripture, warmed all seasons. If you'd asked that younger me what tomorrow held, I'd have said children running through sprinkler arcs, paperback books swapped under oak trees, and maybe blue ribbons for my peach preserves. Never, not in 1,000 cracked corn husks, would I have pictured a cellar door clanging shut behind me. Yet here I sit, years later, fingers spotted with age and heart heavy with lessons I never sought, telling you plain. A dream can glow so bright it blinds you to the shadows gathering at its edges. But hush now, there's time enough for darkness. Tonight I just wanted you to feel the gentle heartbeat of that long ago Railton dawn, to smell frying crullers and lilac starch, to see a young girl spinning futures out of library dust motes and choir notes, believing, oh, how fiercely she believed, that folks always come home, and kindness, once given, would circle back like geese on the spring wind. Well, I can still picture the very second the needle of my tidy little compass life swung off true north, and mercy, it came wrapped in nothing but a rain-spattered corduroy jacket and a shy smile. It was late September of '85. The library smelled of floor wax and chalk dust, and I was shelving Hardy Boys when the front door banged open on a gust fit to bend cornstalks sideways. There, hunched against the wind, stood a lanky slip of a girl I'd never seen, freckles scattered like seeds, hair damp and coppery, clutching a Polaroid camera to her chest as though it might startle and bolt. "Ma'am, could I hide here a spell?" she whispered, voice thin as pane glass, and before I could ask her name she was tracing the spines of mystery novels with trembling fingers, eyes flicking toward the courthouse clock outside like she was racing the chimes. Something in that glance tugged my heartstrings hard, the way a hymn's high note can make your vision swim, and I felt an odd, humming foreboding. Couldn't be told you why, only that the air seemed suddenly heavier, thick with hush-up secrets. 5, maybe 10 minutes later, Frank swung by to fetch me for lunch, boots squeaking, hair still damp from the grain elevator's mist. He caught sight of the girl and froze, face blanching a shade I'd never seen on my bold truck driver, and I swear the room chilled 2 degrees. "Everything all right, Rosie?" he asked, too casual, knuckles white on the doorframe, and the girl, Lord help me, flinched as if a trap snapped shut. She mumbled "thank you" and slipped out the side exit before I could press a library card into her hand. The bell over the door jangled once, twice, then fell silent. That night, while I stirred peach preserves, Frank sat stone still at the table, eyes fixed on nothing, and every so often he'd tap his ring against the formica, cluck, 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 like a woodpecker on dead wood. I tried teasing a smile, asked if the elevator chains had rattled his nerves, but he only said, "Some folks just wander places they don't belong." The next morning, Sheriff Harris's flyer fluttered on the bulletin board. "Missing, ENILYRS, age 17, last seen downtown Railton." My knees went watery. I recognized that shy smile, the Polaroid camera. Frank studied the poster too long, jaw working, then tore it down so it wouldn't scare the kiddies. Land o' Goshen, my pulse drummed such a racket I could hardly stamp due date straight, yet I chalked it up to librarian fretfulness. After all, good wives mind their faith and trust their husbands. Ain't that the tune we hummed? Still, each time the bell above the library door tinkled, I half expected ENI to step back in, cheeks rosy, ready to finish her mystery novel. Instead, weeks slipped by, leaves turned bronze, and Frank grew restless, driving his rig deeper into the night, returning with grease under his nails and a hush around his shoulders. One Sunday in Advent, Mama set an extra plate for whoever's lonely, and Frank's hand shook when he passed the gravy, splattering turkey drippings across Grandma's lace runner. I noticed the way a robin senses barometric change, but I swallowed any question, telling myself storms pass quicker if you don't stare straight at the lightning. Looking back, that single gust-blown entrance, one frightened girl, one flash of fear in my husband's eyes, was the hinge on which my whole life tilted. I didn't know it then, yet my heart gave a jump like a sparrow startled from the eaves, and every beat afterward sounded slightly out of tune. Something precious had shifted, maybe innocence, maybe equilibrium, and try as I might, I couldn't tuck it neatly between book covers. Now, when I think of turning points, I taste cinnamon dust and sea rain on corduroy, and I understand that sometimes destiny arrives not with a shout, but with a creak of the library door and a look that says, "Remember me, because forgetting won't save you." Lord help me, the first real crack in my well-pressed life came quiet as a loose floorboard. Winter of '86, snow petticoats billowed over the prairie, and Frank, who once whistled Chattanooga choo-choo louder than the elevator chains, began keeping odd hours, driving grain runs clear to Kansas and back without so much as a howdy. Then the county economy dipped and his rig got idled, so he prowled the house like a caged tomcat, snapping at squeaky hinges and blaming the thermostat for every shiver, and each time I suggested a hymn or a jar of my peach preserve, he'd mutter, "That sugar only hides rot." When Sheriff Harris stapled missing posters on every pole, poor ENI's freckled grin fading under sleet, Frank barked at the TV, said folks ought to mind their own, and by spring the townspeople did exactly that, because nobody wants trouble riding shotgun. I choir practice Sister Martha whispered that Frank's laugh sounded hollow these days, but I defended him with a too bright smile, cheeks burning like crabapple jelly. Inside, though, a shameful question pecked at my ribs. What if the man I loved was slipping somewhere I couldn't follow? Still, Railton's unspoken rule was don't air dirty laundry, so I scrubbed mine in silence, stuffing worries between hymnals and returns desk logbooks. One stormy April afternoon, Frank found me cataloging new storybooks, baby ducks in rain boots on the covers, and slammed the office door hard enough to rattle every Dewey Decimal. His eyes were red-rimmed, voice low as cellar dust. "Rose," he hissed. "Rumors spread like thistles. Best keep our business locked tight." Land o' Goshen, a cold trickle crawled down my spine, yet all I managed was a nod, because good wives stand by their husbands, don't they? That night I tried phoning my sister Betty Sue, but Frank stood in the doorway, arms crossed, reminding me long-distance rates were sinful extravagance. I hung up with fingers trembling, heart pounding a warning drum, only I could hear. Days blurred, choir cancelled for roof repairs, library hours trimmed for budgets, and suddenly my safe little routines felt thin as onion skin. One Friday, while dusting children's shelves, I overheard young Deputy Cowell tell the sheriff they'd traced a grain truck license plate near where E&I vanished. My stomach lurched, for Frank's rig matched that description right down to the dented mudflap. I wanted to march straight home and demand the truth, but fear cinched my throat. What if my question made things worse? Shame bubbled, too. Was I cowardly for doubting or foolish for believing? Meanwhile, folks began side-eyeing me at the Piggly Wiggly, whispering how Mrs. Bennet looked peaked. I pasted on a librarian smile and fielded canned goods gossip while inside a tub of war raged, loyalty braided to dread. One Sunday in May, Mama's old quilt snagged on a nail, tearing the square that read faith a silly accident, yet it felt like a prophecy unraveling at the seam. I cried in the pantry, wishing Daddy's steady whistle could slice the gloom, but he'd been gone 10 summers and only echoes answered. Support? Mercy. There was Betty Sue, miles away, mailing me lilac-scented postcards. There was Pastor Glenn, though he favored sermons about turning the other cheek. Mostly I was alone with two clashing truths. I loved Frank Bennet, and I feared the shadow creeping over his shoulders. That double-edged ache grew heavier each dusk, until even the kindly books on my shelves, stories where villains are exposed and justice strides in, felt like hollow promises. Looking back, that season was a tightrope strung between hush and scream, and every footstep squeaked a little louder, but I kept tiptoeing, praying the rope would strengthen on its own, never guessing it was being sawed through from the other end. Well now, neighbor, lean in close, 'cause this is the breath-holding minute when the porch light of my life snapped off and the world went darker than a coal bin at midnight. It was the third Thursday of July 1988. Heat lightning jittering along the horizon while the grain elevator chains clanked like ghostly tambourines, and I had just ladled a final spoon of peach preserve into a mason jar when Frank trudged through the back door, shirt clinging to him, eyes rimmed raw, a smell of diesel and dread wrapped around his shoulders. He didn't kiss my cheek the way he used to, just muttered, "Basement's cooler, Rosie, grab the flashlight." Something in his tone, flat, no chug of affection, tugged at my ribs, yet I followed, still the obedient choir alto who believed a hymn could mend any crack. Down those wooden steps I went, jar in hand, and the air grew thick, damp like breath held too long. At the landing I heard the cellar door creak louder than usual, then a metallic scrape, clank, steel bar sliding into place. Time seized right there, same as if God himself pressed pause. The dust motes stopped drifting, the faucet drip froze mid-fall, and even my pulse skipped, confused. I remember staring at that peach jar, sunlit gold moments before, now ink black in the single bulb's gloom. In that hush a realization seeped in colder than well water. My own husband had locked me away. I called his name, voice wobbling, Frank. Honey? Footsteps retreated overhead, boards groaning like reluctant witnesses, and the little ventilation window high on the wall showed nothing but corn tops swaying, indifferent. Shock throbbed first, big as the courthouse bell. Then panic, hot and sour, burned up my throat. I rattled the knob, pounded till my palms stung, pleaded, prayed, reasoned. Franklin Wade Bennett, you open this door right now. No answer save the distant elevator chains and a cicada whine. In that hammering silence, I lost more than daylight. I lost the simple faith that love always comes back around. Then the cellar bulb flickered, and another truth cracked open. I was utterly alone. Aloneness is a sharp-edged thing, neighbor. It slices through sentiment like a scythe. My knees buckled, skirt brushing the cold brick, and shame flooded in. How had I missed the warning signs? The hollow laugh, the ring tapping at supper. A librarian should catch details, yet I'd shelved my own instincts right beside the fairy tales. Tears welled, but anger elbowed forward, bright, unfamiliar, almost electric. I slammed my jar against the door, glass shattering, syrup dripping like slow amber blood. That sound, tiny yet defiant, echoed off beams and said, in its sticky way, you're still here, Rose, and you still matter. I sat with my back to the oak planks, sticky peaches cooling on my skirt, pulse finally crawling on, and I felt myself changing, minute by terrible minute, into someone forged from splinters and resolve. What had I lost? Freedom, surely. The porch swings, the chapter books, the comfort of Frank's once steady grin. But what did I find in that same breath? A grim, glinting shard of self-respect, sharper than I knew I possessed. That night the grandfather clock in our parlor chimed 10 muffled notes I could barely hear through the floorboards, yet to me it marked the birth of a reckoning. The woman who knelt and crushed peaches would rise, someday, and demand the whole truth about Frank, about that missing girl, about every secret buried beneath our feet. From that heartbeat on, fear and fury braided together inside me, a rope I would climb inch by inch through 12 long years of dusk. So remember this, friend. Sometimes the very moment the clock seems to stop is the same moment a new kind of heartbeat begins, louder, stronger, unwilling to be silenced ever again. Well, neighbor, after that cellar door clanged shut and the peaches dripped into sticky constellations on my skirt, the world thinned to 4 stone walls, a dirt floor, and a vent no bigger than a recipe card, and every sound above my head, Frank's boots crossing planks, a radio jingle, the mail truck's cough, felt like it belonged to another Clara Rose entirely. Days slid into one another like damp pages, and I kept time by the pulse in my ears and by counting corn kernels that sifted through cracks from the kitchen, dropping with soft planks I named after Bible verses just to keep my mind stitched together. Yet even scripture seemed far off, its promises smudged as chalk after rain. Mercy's sakes, I learned the language of silence, how it growls at midnight when the furnace cuts off, how it hisses when a field mouse scurries, how it settles on your shoulders heavier than a winter quilt, and before long the hush felt almost companionable, almost, until a distant church bell would toll 7, 8, 9 and remind me the choir was singing without its alto, the library door was chiming without my greeting, and somewhere children were pronouncing encyclopedia for the first time, with no Miss Bennett to clap. I talked to the shadows, called one hope and another stubborn, and I braided their imaginary fingers through mine, because a woman left alone too long will either craft company out of air or go plumb brittle. Still, while I clung to hope, stubborn kept me breathing. Believe me, I wrestled with the Lord, whispered that surely goodness and mercy had taken the wrong detour, Yet the ceiling never split with answers, and my faith, once bright as penny candy foil, dulled to a tarnished locket I wore mostly from habit. Some evenings I pressed my ear to the door and heard Frank pacing, muttering numbers, maybe dates, maybe sins. Other evenings nothing at all, which was somehow worse, because a silence that deep makes a body wonder if the rest of the planet simply folded up and left you there to blink out like a lone firefly. Land, O Goshen, loneliness changes a heart's geometry. It stretches the distance between beats until each thump sounds foreign, and it carves hollows where music used to echo. I stopped humming in the garden, not out of spite, but because the notes felt too round for such a square of darkness. Yet even pared down to bone and breath, a flicker of self, call it librarian tidy-mindedness, kept urging me to catalog each day. The pattern of spider webs, the drip rhythm, the scent shifts from diesel to lilac whenever Betty Sue's postcards arrived upstairs. Though I never saw them, that tiny discipline became a spine I could lean on. Did I trust people after that? Mercy, now. My belief in open doors shrank to a pinhole, and the idea that love was unconditional seemed like a children's rhyme I'd once read aloud, pleasant but not quite real. Still, I found an uneasy truce with the quiet. I plotted invisible quilts on the wall, stitched from sunlight shards that sneaked through the vent at noon, and I vowed, oh, how fierce a vow whispered in pitch can be, that if ever daylight brushed my cheek again, I'd carry those invisible stitches into the world so no one would mistake silence for peace. So I existed, halfway between breathing and belonging, neither the woman I had been nor the one I would become, suspended like a bookmark in a story gone missing. But let me tell you plain, a page left open that long gathers strength along its crease, and someday it will turn even if the wind has to roar to do it. Well now, friend, hope doesn't always sweep in like a brass band. Sometimes it creeps up barefoot, the way dawn tiptoes through lace curtains, and for me it arrived one wind-rattled afternoon in March of '95, my 7th year under those sagging joists, when a single shaft of sunlight wriggled through the vent and struck a cobweb at just the right angle, turning each thread to spun gold. I'd seen that vent light 1,000 times, but that day the sparkle reminded me of the gilt edge on Mama's old Bible. And land, O Goshen, my heart gave a skitter like a cricket in a jelly jar, whispering that maybe, just maybe, the Lord still kept my name jotted in his margins. I scooted my rickety stool beneath the beam and lifted my chin into its warmth, first honest warmth I'd felt in weeks, and I caught myself humming in the garden, soft as dandelion fuzz, until the tune rolled out full and sure, filling the cellar like fresh air. Right then a memory near knocked me sideways. Little E&I liar standing in the library, clinging to that Polaroid camera, saying, "Ma'am, could I hide here a spell?" Hide. Mercy's sakes, hide. The girl was still missing, but her plea echoed so clear it felt like a nudge from somewhere kinder than concrete. I looked around my dusty prison and thought, Rose, you can't rescue E&I, but you can rescue the pieces of yourself Frank tried to bury. That notion flared hotter than any anger, and a plan, tiny as a seed tick, took root. First, I scavenged. The busted lamp in the corner still held 2 feet of copper wire coiled like a sleeping snake. I teased it free, straightened it against a beam, and felt absurdly proud, as though I'd checked out a new adventure novel. Next, I pried loose a splintered shelf plank, snapped it into 8 stubby stakes, and began tapping more stots on the pipe that ran upstairs. Didn't matter that no one outside could decipher. It mattered that I was talking again, announcing in my own code, I am here. I am here. Each tap rewove a frayed thread of my identity, the librarian who loved patterns and sounds. The days that followed carried a hush of anticipation. Every time the light slanted in, I traced its path along the floorboards, hunting soft spots. One evening my toe caught on a mold-swollen board that thumped hollow, and a brand new spark quickened in my chest, like a library mystery revealing chapter 12. I marked that spot with peach jar glass, a glimmering X. Was my situation magically fixed? Lord, no. Frank still paced overhead. The vents still hissed cold come nightfall, and fear crouched in the corners. But now fear had company. Purpose, small and stubborn, an ember I cupped with both hands. I began exercising, of all things pushing against the wall 10 times each sunrise, steering my breath the way choir warm-ups once studied a note, because if opportunity knocked I intended to be strong enough to answer. And wouldn't you know, with each stretch I felt my voice grow steadier, thoughts sharper, as though my mind had been a shub book now reopening page by blessed page. That glint of wire, that triangle of sunlight, Ian-I's remembered whisper, all snugged together into a quiet anthem saying, "Get ready." Ready for what? I couldn't yet name, but the cellar no longer felt like a full stop, it felt like a comma, pausing before the next brave sentence. So yes, neighbor, hope returned, cautious as a stray cat. You don't clap or holler, you just set out a dish and let it sniff around. Yet once it chooses your doorstep, the night seems shorter somehow. And in that trimmed darkness, I finally believed, honest to goodness, that a second chance was limbering its fingers just beyond the latch, waiting for me to finish my preparations and swing wide the door myself. Well now, neighbor, I suppose a heart can sit in limbo only so long before it makes a declaration, and mine finally stood up for roll call on a thunderslick evening in February of 1998, nearly 10 years underground, when the wind outside howled like an old train heading home and the cellar walls seemed to breathe with each gust. I had just finished humming my 10 push against the brick exercises when the bulb above me fizzed, flared bright, then blinked out entirely, plunging that cramped world into ink. Yet instead of panic, a curious hush settled over my bones, and a thought as clear as well water rose. Clara Rose, you are done waiting for someone else's mercy. Either you climb toward daylight on your own 2 elbows, or you perish singing to shadows. In that sudden night, I could feel every beat of my pulse tallying the years, each thump a small verdict, and I realized the worst thing Frank ever stole wasn't freedom, but the notion that my choices still mattered. Land, oh Goshen. The very absurdity of it sparked a laugh out of me, soft, ragged, but real, and that laugh cracked something crusted inside, letting sorrow pour out like stale rainwater and washing the floors of my spirit clean. I groped for the copper wire coil I'd been hoarding, slipped it through the loosened plank I'd marked with peach glass, and began sawing back and forth, slow, steady, deliberate. With every scrape I whispered names of people I'd loved, Mama, Daddy, Betty Sue, little Ian-I, promising each one I would not let their memories be caged in this tomb. The board splintered after an hour that felt like a lifetime, revealing a pocket of earth soft enough to dig with a spoon. I knelt, tears running warm, and scooped dirt while confessing aloud the secret I'd stifled all these years. I am angry, yes, but I also ache for the girl my husband wronged and for the man he might have been before fear twisted him, and I can hold both truths without letting either one define me. Saying it felt like dropping a yoke from my shoulders. Then, because symbolism matters to a librarian, I slipped off my wedding band, the gold dulled, the inscription nearly worn smooth, and pressed it deep into that hollow, covering it with the same soil that had chilled my feet for a decade. It wasn't vengeance, more a gentle burial of dreams that could no longer bloom. I sat back, palms filthy, and exhaled, half expecting the heavens to rumble an answer. Instead came only the steady patter of rainwater through the vent, but it sounded, mercy me, like applause. In that dim glow of nothing, I declared a covenant with myself. I would live beyond the cellar, not merely survive it. I would trust my own witness, sing my own alto, quilt stories from scars. And if the world met me with suspicion, I'd meet it with patient truth. The bulb sputtered alive again just then, casting a small halo over the fresh-turned patch, and I saw that the dirt formed an uneven heart shape, ugly, honest, unmistakably mine. From that night forward, every action, every plan, every whispered Morse tap drifted outward from that single decision like ripples from a stone. I had chosen life, plain and unvarnished, without bargaining for perfect endings, and no bar, no lie, no storm overhead could pry that choice from me. So, neighbor, if you ever wonder whether a soul can vote for itself after years of silence, take it from an old gal who buried her own ring in the dark. The moment you claim responsibility for tomorrow, even the pitch-black cellar listens differently. And the first thing it tells you is that regret can't outrun a woman who's finally moving forward. Well now, neighbor, a soul can tread water only so long before it must decide whether to sink or strike for shore, and mine reached that choosing on a thunderslick Tuesday night in February of 1998, 10 years, 4 months, and 13 aching days since Frank's steel bar robbed me of daylight. The cellar bulb coughed, fizzled, and died, baptizing everything in velvet black. Yet instead of panic, a sudden hush rolled through my bones, and I heard my own heartbeat tapping a plain question. Clara Rose, are you living or merely lasting? In that syrupy dark, I pictured Daddy's pocket watch, frozen at the minute he passed, and I told myself time was not a cage, but a compass. If the needle still quivered, I could still choose a direction. So I reached for the copper wire coil I'd hoarded, slid it beneath the plank whose hollowness I'd mapped with peach jar glass, and sawed back and forth until the board surrendered a soft groan. Earth crumbled free, cool, forgiving, and in that small hollow I laid 3 burdens: my dulled wedding ring, Frank's false driver's license, the charred key heavy as original sin. Bearing them was no rage howl. It was a gardener tucking spoiled seeds where they could harm no tender shoot. With every fistful of soil, I whispered a confession I'd gagged on for years. I loved him, yes, but loving a person never obligates you to obey their darkness. Tears slid hot as cider down my cheeks, and each tear felt like a stamp of release, canceling a debt I'd never owed. When the last crumb of dirt patted smooth, I pressed my palms to the mound and made a covenant I could live by. I would carry the past honestly, yet I'd refuse to let it steer tomorrow. No more should-haves, if-onlys, or dusk-dim regrets, just the clean fact of now and the wide maybe of next. A crack of lightning flashed through the postcard vent, igniting the cellar dust in silver sparks, and for one breath I saw my own outline glowing fierce around the edges, as though the storm itself wrote me back into the ledger of the living. I stood knee-shaky but willing and felt afresh, humming vacancy where dread had camped so long. Into that vacancy flooded something lighter than mercy, tougher than anger. Call it resolve, call it grace with work boots on, but it straightened my spine and steadied my lungs. I wiped my eyes with the hem of my threadbare skirt and said aloud, voice low, steady, settled, I choose forward. No pretenses, no grudges, just forward. The bulb flickered to life, dim yet loyal, and its meek glow traced a path from the loosened plank to the door latch, as if blessing the route my feet already ached to take. I knew the road ahead would still carry night winds, but the ring of truth now burned inside my ribs, bright enough to guide me through any cellar ever built. Well now, sweet listener, when I settle onto the porch at sunset and the June bugs start pinging the screen, I lay the woman I was beside the woman I am, the way a quilter spreads 2 frayed squares to decide which side will face the winter. The Clara Rose of 1988 believed studied cheerfulness, and a warm jar of peach preserve could mend anything from squeaky hinges to bruised feelings. The Clara Rose who crawled out of that cellar 12 years later knows sweetness, unguarded, does not keep rafters from sagging, it merely coats the splinters until they grow bold enough to pierce. Back then I trusted doors because they had always opened. Now I trust my hands because they learned how to pry a bar loose when nobody else even knocked. I discovered life is less a tidy novel than a card catalog missing half its drawers. You cannot chase down every reference, yet you still get to decide which stories circulate in the light. Frank tried to file me under victim, but one gray morning I peeled that label away and penciled author, and the universe did not veto the edit. Since then, whenever folks ask what kept my lungs counting, I do not hand them bumper sticker wisdom. I admit endurance is messy. Some hours you pray in full sentences, other hours you hum nonsense syllables so fear cannot finish its own tune, and most hours you simply keep breathing because quitting would let the darkness feel right about you. Here's what I carried upstairs. Hope is not a parachute that flutters down from kinder skies. It is a ladder you whittle from whatever scraps you can reach, and the splinters prove you are climbing. Forgiveness is not a blanket pardon, it is choosing to set your luggage on the shoulder so the journey does not break your back. I forgave Frank only after I forgave myself for pretending thunder was distant long after it rattled the stovepipes. Waiting can be virtue, but it can also be camouflage for fear. If a room stays locked too long, the air itself turns against you. Maybe it is time you stopped sitting polite on the wrong side of a door and tested the handle, just to see whether the latch is as stubborn as the worry in your head. I will not paint the present sunflower yellow. Some nights a gust rattles the gutter and my tongue tastes rusted nail, yet even that tang reminds me I am tasting, proof the jar of me is open, not shelved. I sing softer now, but the notes carry farther, like a train whistle that proves the truck still runs past midnight towns. Mark my words, the world will not clap right away. Porch boards may creak, voices may doubt, but courage is a seed that germinates underground long before anyone sees a sprout. Give it water and watch. No cellar, no secret, no season of hush can outlast a heart that votes for forward. I chose forward. No pretenses. No grudges. Simply forward, and maybe point another traveler toward bright sunrise. That choice did not hand me pages already written, it handed me blanks and lines and a stubby pencil. Some mornings my hand shakes, but the scribbles it makes are mine, and that ownership tastes fresher than any jar I canned. If you fear your story is ruined, remember paper keeps accepting ink as long as the edge stays unburned. Start a footnote, draw a doodle, spell your name twice. Permanence arrives later, when daylight rereads what you dared to jot. Well now, sweetheart, the porch light's shiverin' on its chain and the crickets have struck up their easy waltz, so let me lay this story gently in your hands and trust you'll keep it breathing. I tell it not to garnish yesterday's wounds, but to season today's courage. Because every syllable still rattles in my teacup each morning I stir in honey and memory. Picture me rocking slow, quilt tucked over my knees, July fireflies stitching bright embroidery against the dark. The cellar dust is long washed off my palms, yet the grooves it carved remain a private topography I trace whenever thunder rolls. And here you sit, yes, you, kind stranger on the other side of this glowing screen, sharing the night air with a 74-year-old librarian who once believed doors open simply because they should. If my tale flickered something in your chest, maybe it's this. Life keeps composing second verses even when the first stops on a sour chord. The trick is to lean your ear close enough to catch the pickup note. Some evenings I still catch myself glancing toward the road, half expecting Frank's silhouette beneath the yard lamp, and when the wind smells of diesel I wonder whether remorse rides shotgun in his cab. Forgiveness never promised amnesia, only room enough to breathe. Other nights I dream of E&I Liars, her freckles bright as constellations, and I wake certain I hear a camera click in the hallway. as if she's come to snapshot proof that stories, like photographs, can develop long after the shutter falls. These whispers remind me the past is not a chain, it's a compass, and the needle swings truest when we own both the damage and the distance traveled. So tell me, dear heart, how does my road bend into yours? Are you perched before a figurative cellar door you've convinced yourself is safer shut? Might it be time to test the latch, to choose forward without waiting for perfect guarantees? I've learned love is not measured by how tightly it holds, but by whether it ushers both souls toward the brightest version of themselves. Real love circles back only if it can walk beside you in open daylight. And that leaves me wondering, what do you reckon? Should true love always return, or does its honesty sometimes mean letting go? I'd be mighty obliged if you'd pour that question into the comments below, because swapping wisdom is how porch neighbors become kin. As for me, I keep a new jar of peach preserve cooling on the sill and a quilt square stitched with the words 12 years, 12 lessons ready for the county fair. When I tuck the tag beneath the binding, I sometimes fancy a distant truck horn answers, low and lonesome, like it recognizes the note. Maybe that's just prairie echo, or maybe conscience travels farther than any highway map. Truth is, I don't surely know, and that unknowing feels like wind in an open field. A little lonely, a lot alive. So, I'll leave the porch lamp glowing, its circle of light wide enough for passers-by who need a rest and a listening ear, and I'll keep humming until the last syllable of dusk fades into a brand new line of sunrise. Now it's your turn, friend. What door have you been waiting for someone else to unlock, and what's one small choice you could make tonight, right now, that would tip the story back into your own hands? I hope you'll ponder that as the credits of evening roll, and if the rustle of cornfields ever drifts through your window, maybe you'll remember an old librarian who chose forward. No pretenses, no grudges, simply forward. And you'll let that breeze remind you to open whatever door still aches to see the light.